My wife boasted, "I control everything in this marriage." I filed papers quietly and transferred assets to my name. Her lawyer's face when he saw the prenup clause? She collapsed in court. The words still echo in my mind from that December night when everything changed, when Victoria's need to publicly demonstrate her dominance finally gave me the legal ammunition I needed to escape what had become a suffocating prison disguised as a marriage. I'm a civil engineer, someone who builds bridges and solves structural problems for a living, but I couldn't seem to fix the fundamental issues in my own relationship. Victoria worked in real estate, which meant she was naturally good at presenting things in the best possible light, even when the foundation was completely rotten. Our company's annual Christmas gala in Chicago was supposed to be a celebration, a chance for spouses to meet colleagues and enjoy an elegant evening at the Palmer House Hotel. Instead, it became the night Victoria handed me my freedom on a silver platter, though she had no idea what she was doing at the time. We'd been married 4 years, and I'd grown accustomed to her need to be in charge of everything from our social calendar to our financial decisions, but she'd never been quite this public about it before. The ballroom was filled with my co-workers, their spouses, and senior management, including my supervisor James Rodriguez, a man I respected and who'd been instrumental in my recent promotion to senior project manager. Victoria looked stunning in her red cocktail dress, the one that cost more than most people's monthly car payments, and she knew exactly how good she looked. "Troy's so lucky I handle all the real decisions in our household," she announced loudly to our table of 8, which included James and his wife Maria, plus 2 other couples from my department. He'd probably still be living in that tiny apartment eating ramen noodles if I hadn't taken charge of our finances and pushed him toward better opportunities. The conversation had started innocently enough, with Maria asking Victoria about her work in real estate, but somehow it had morphed into a detailed explanation of how she managed every aspect of our marriage. I felt my face flush as I took a sip of wine, trying to appear calm while my colleagues exchanged uncomfortable glances. "Victoria handles a lot of our household planning," I said quietly, hoping to redirect the conversation, but she wasn't finished. "A lot? Try everything that matters," she laughed, reaching over to pat my hand like I was a child who'd said something cute. "Troy's brilliant with his engineering projects, but when it comes to real-life decisions, he needs someone with vision to guide him. I picked our apartment, I chose our investment portfolio, I even had to push him to ask for his last promotion because he's too modest to advocate for himself properly." James raised an eyebrow, clearly uncomfortable with the direction this was heading. "Well, Troy's certainly proven himself capable of handling major projects independently," he said diplomatically. "Oh, at work maybe," Victoria waved dismissively, "but at home? Let's just say I'm the one who really wears the pants in our relationship, isn't that right, honey?" The entire table went silent. I could see the pity in Maria's eyes, the second-hand embarrassment on my colleague David's face, and something that looked almost like professional concern in James's expression. This wasn't playful banter anymore. This was systematic humiliation in front of the people I worked with every day. "As a matter of fact," Victoria continued, apparently oblivious to the awkward atmosphere she'd created, "I've already decided we're moving to a bigger house next year. Troy keeps talking about being practical and saving money, but sometimes you have to make bold moves to get ahead in life. I found this gorgeous place in Lincoln Park, and I'm going to make sure we get it." I hadn't agreed to any house purchase. We discussed maybe looking at properties in a year or 2 after we'd saved more for a substantial down payment, but Victoria had apparently moved past the discussion phase and straight into the decision phase without bothering to inform me. "That sounds like a big step," James said carefully. "Have you 2 been house hunting together?" "Troy comes along when I tell him to," Victoria laughed, "but honestly, I have better taste and I understand the market better than he does. He'd probably choose some boring suburban box if I left it up to him. No, this is definitely a decision that requires my expertise." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced smiles and stilted conversation. I watched Victoria work the room, introducing herself to senior management as the woman behind Troy's success, and making comments about how she'd shaped my career trajectory through her superior social instincts. By the time we got home, I was seething quietly while she chattered about how well the evening had gone and how impressed everyone seemed with her insights about real estate investment. "Did you see how interested Mr. Patterson was when I explained our house hunting strategy?" she said, kicking off her heels. "I think having a wife who understands wealth building really reflects well on you professionally." That night, lying in bed listening to Victoria plan our future without my input, I realized that 4 years of marriage had gradually eroded my sense of self-respect until I'd become a supporting character in my own life. But Victoria had made one crucial mistake that evening. She'd humiliated me in front of my professional colleagues, documented by dozens of witnesses who'd heard every word. And thanks to a specific clause in our prenuptial agreement that she'd insisted on adding herself, thinking she was being clever, that public humiliation was about to become the key to my liberation. The next morning, while Victoria slept in after her triumphant evening of social networking, I drove downtown to the law offices of Hayes and Associates and requested an emergency consultation with divorce attorney Robert Hayes. I'd done my research carefully, choosing someone known for handling complex prenuptial agreements rather than just picking a name from a phone book like some desperate husband having a midlife crisis. Robert was a measured man in his 50s with silver hair and the kind of calm confidence that comes from 3 decades of family law practice. "Tell me about this prenuptial agreement," he said after I'd explained the previous evening's humiliation, and specifically about any clauses regarding public behavior or professional reputation. I pulled out our prenup, a document I hadn't looked at in 4 years but had kept in our home safe along with other important papers. Victoria had insisted on hiring her own attorney during our engagement, claiming she wanted to protect her real estate commissions and ensure she wasn't taken advantage of financially. What she'd actually done was add several clauses she thought would benefit her, including one that invalidated the entire agreement if either spouse engaged in deliberate public humiliation or professional sabotage of the other. "She added this herself?" Robert asked, studying the specific language with growing interest. "Her attorney actually advised against it, but Victoria insisted. She was worried I might try to undermine her real estate career or embarrass her in front of clients." The irony was absolutely perfect. Victoria had been so concerned about protecting herself from theoretical humiliation that she'd created a legal mechanism for her own downfall. "This clause is very clear," Robert explained, "and based on what you've described, your wife's behavior at the Christmas party constitutes a textbook violation. The public nature of the humiliation, the professional setting, the presence of your supervisor, it's exactly what this clause was designed to prevent." I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: control over my own destiny. While Victoria spent the next several days shopping for expensive furniture for our imaginary new house and calling real estate agents about properties we couldn't afford, I quietly began the process of protecting my financial future. The first step was transferring our joint savings account to an account in my name only, something I could do legally since I was the primary breadwinner and account holder. Next came moving our investment portfolio, including the $45,000 in mutual funds that Victoria considered her house down payment fund. I also transferred the contents of our money market account, the emergency fund that Victoria had been eyeing for her Lincoln Park dream house. The entire process took 3 days of careful financial maneuvering, all conducted during my lunch breaks and after Victoria left for her various shopping expeditions. She was so busy planning our supposed future that she never bothered to check our account balances, trusting that I'd simply go along with her decisions like I always had before. "I want to file the papers next Friday," I told Robert during our second meeting, the day after Victoria's birthday party. "She's planning to announce our house hunting plans to both our families, and I want her to have that moment of supreme confidence before reality hits." Robert nodded approvingly. "Document everything between now and then. Keep records of her spending, her public statements about controlling your marriage, anything that supports the pattern of behavior that led to the prenup violation." I spent the following week watching Victoria prepare for what she thought would be her victory lap, a birthday celebration where she could showcase her power over our marriage to family and friends. She booked the private dining room at an upscale restaurant, invited both sets of parents plus her sister Claire and my brother Mark, and spent hours planning her announcement about our real estate investment strategy. Victoria even bought a new dress for the occasion, charging $800 to our credit card without asking, because she wanted to look successful when she revealed her plans for our financial future. Meanwhile, I methodically prepared legal documents, gathered witness statements from my colleagues about the Christmas party incident, and arranged for the prenup clause violation to be formally documented. Victoria had no idea that while she was planning her moment of triumph, I was planning my moment of liberation from a marriage that had become a prison of constant judgment and control. The birthday party was scheduled for Saturday evening, and I planned to serve divorce papers on Sunday morning, giving Victoria exactly 24 hours to enjoy her fantasy before facing the reality of what her need for public domination had cost her. Victoria's 31st birthday celebration was everything she'd envisioned: elegant restaurant, perfectly arranged flowers. Both families gathered around the private dining room table she'd reserved weeks in advance. She wore her new $800 dress with the confidence of someone who believed she controlled every aspect of her world, including the husband sitting quietly beside her, watching her performance with detached curiosity. My parents sat across from us, polite but clearly uncomfortable with Victoria's increasingly grandiose personality over the years, while her mother Claire beamed with pride at her daughter's apparent success in training a husband to fund her lifestyle. "I have some exciting news to share with everyone," Victoria announced after the appetizers arrived, raising her wine glass with theatrical flair. "Troy and I have decided to take the next big step in building our wealth portfolio." I noticed she said, "decided," rather than "I decided," though we all knew who'd made this choice. "We're buying our first house," she continued, smiling broadly at the surprised faces around the table. "I've found this absolutely gorgeous property in Lincoln Park, 4 bedrooms, completely renovated, perfect for entertaining and building equity in one of Chicago's most desirable neighborhoods." My father raised his eyebrows. "That's a big purchase, son. You two have been saving for this?" "Oh, we've got everything figured out," Victoria laughed, waving dismissively. "I've been managing our finances for years, and I know exactly how much we can afford. The key is thinking big and not letting fear hold you back from good investments." She turned to my mother with conspiratorial excitement. "I'm also going to train Troy to do proper yard maintenance once we have our own lawn. He's never had to worry about curb appeal before, but homeownership requires more attention to detail." The casual way she discussed training me like a household pet, in front of both our families, was exactly the kind of public humiliation that had led us to this moment. My brother Mark looked uncomfortable, my mother's smile became increasingly strained, and Claire nodded approvingly as if Victoria had announced something perfectly reasonable rather than revealing her complete disregard for my autonomy. "This house sounds expensive," my father said carefully. "Have you two discussed the financial implications thoroughly?" "Dad, I appreciate your concern," Victoria replied with barely concealed condescension, "but I understand real estate markets better than most people. This isn't about playing it safe with small thinking. Troy's finally learning to trust my judgment about major financial decisions." Finally learning. As if my previous reluctance to make impulsive purchases was some character flaw she'd been patiently correcting. I excused myself from the table, telling everyone I needed to retrieve something from the car, and returned 5 minutes later with a manila envelope that made Victoria's eyes narrow with sudden suspicion. "Actually, there's something I need to share too," I said calmly, sitting back down and placing the envelope beside my plate. "What's that?" Claire asked, clearly sensing the shift in atmosphere but not understanding what was happening. "Divorce papers," I replied matter-of-factly, opening the envelope and removing the documents Robert had prepared. "Victoria won't need to worry about finding housing arrangements much longer since our prenuptial agreement is now void due to her violation of the public humiliation clause." The silence that followed was absolutely deafening. Victoria's wine glass stopped halfway to her lips, her face draining of color as she processed what I'd just said. Claire's mouth fell open, my mother gasped audibly, and my father sat back in his chair with an expression that looked almost like relief. "What are you talking about?" Victoria whispered, her voice suddenly small and uncertain. "The Christmas party," I explained calmly, "where you spent the evening telling my colleagues and supervisor that you control every decision in our marriage, that you wear the pants in our relationship, and that I'm too incompetent to make adult choices without your guidance." That constitutes deliberate public humiliation in a professional setting, which voids our prenuptial agreement according to the clause you insisted on adding. Victoria's face went from pale to ashen as the implications hit her. You can't be serious. That was just conversation. I was being social. You announced our house purchase without consulting me, discussed training me to do yard work like I'm your employee, and publicly declared that you make all the real decisions in our marriage. In front of my boss. I kept my voice level and calm, stating facts rather than expressing emotion. The prenup is void, which means you're entitled to your personal belongings and your premarital assets, which total approximately $15,000 in your individual account. Claire finally found her voice. Troy, what are you talking about? What prenup? Victoria never mentioned any prenup. Because she thought it protected her, I replied. She added a clause invalidating the agreement if either spouse publicly humiliated the other professionally. She was worried I might embarrass her in front of real estate clients. Victoria fumbled for her phone with shaking hands, probably to check our bank accounts, while both families stared at the unfolding drama with varying degrees of shock and fascination. When she accessed our banking app and saw the transferred funds, her face transformed from confusion to pure panic. Where's our money? She demanded, her voice rising to a pitch that made other diners turn to look at our table. The down payment fund, our savings, our investments, where is everything? In my personal accounts, I said simply. Since you've spent 4 years publicly declaring that you control our finances and make all our major decisions, I thought you'd appreciate someone else taking charge for once. Victoria started hyperventilating, gripping the edge of the table as the reality of her situation became clear. You can't do this to me. You can't just take everything and leave me with nothing. I'm not taking anything that belongs to you. I'm keeping what I earned while you spent 4 years treating our marriage like your personal ATM and your husband like your pet project. The birthday celebration had become a legal consultation, with both families witnessing Victoria's complete emotional collapse as she realized that her need to publicly demonstrate control had destroyed the very security she'd thought she was protecting. Within 48 hours of the birthday disaster, Victoria had hired Linda Foster, a high-powered divorce attorney with a reputation for aggressive tactics and extracting maximum settlements from wealthy husbands. Linda's initial consultation filled Victoria with renewed confidence, assuring her that prenuptial agreements could always be challenged and that judges rarely left wives completely destitute regardless of contract language. Don't worry about his little power play, Linda told Victoria during their first meeting, which I learned about through Robert's professional network. I've seen this before, controlling husbands who think they can intimidate their wives with legal documents. We'll challenge the validity of that humiliation clause and argue that it's unconscionable and unenforceable. Victoria left that meeting convinced she could still salvage her financial security and even posted cryptic social media updates about fighting for what you deserve and not letting manipulative people destroy your future. She was so confident in Linda's abilities that she actually called me 3 days later, her voice dripping with newfound smugness. My attorney says your little stunt won't hold up in court, she announced. Prenups get thrown out all the time, especially when they contain ridiculous clauses like the one you're trying to use against me. You're going to end up giving me half of everything anyway, plus you'll have to pay my legal fees for putting me through this trauma. I simply told her that my attorney looked forward to reviewing her case and hung up. The first official legal meeting took place the following Thursday in a sterile conference room at Linda's downtown office, with both attorneys present along with Victoria and myself. Linda had clearly prepared Victoria for this moment, coaching her to appear victimized and financially vulnerable rather than the controlling spouse who'd orchestrated her own downfall. My client was clearly coerced into signing an unconscionable prenuptial agreement, Linda began confidently, spreading documents across the polished table. The so-called humiliation clause is vague, punitive, and designed to trap Mrs. Harrison in an abusive relationship where she couldn't express herself freely without fear of financial devastation. Robert listened patiently, taking notes with the calm demeanor of someone who'd heard these arguments countless times before. When Linda finished her opening statement, Robert opened his briefcase and began methodically laying out evidence that made Linda's confident expression slowly fade. Your Honor, Robert began, though we weren't in court yet, I have here signed witness statements from 6 of Mr. Harrison's colleagues who were present at the December 15th Christmas party, including his direct supervisor James Rodriguez. He placed the statements in front of Linda and Victoria. Each witness confirms that Mrs. Harrison publicly declared she wears the pants in their marriage, controls all major decisions, and described her husband as someone who needed her guidance to function as an adult. Victoria's face began to pale as Robert continued. I also have video footage from the hotel's security cameras, which captured audio of Mrs. Harrison's statements about training her husband to do yard work and her declaration that she'd already decided they were purchasing a house without his input or consent. Linda picked up the witness statements, her confident demeanor cracking as she realized the strength of the evidence. Furthermore, Robert continued, I have documentation showing that Mrs. Harrison had independent legal counsel when she insisted on adding the humiliation clause to their prenuptial agreement. Her own attorney advised against including it, but Mrs. Harrison insisted, believing it would protect her from potential embarrassment in her real estate career. This was the moment Victoria realized her own cleverness had trapped her. The clause she demanded, thinking she was protecting herself from future humiliation, had become the legal mechanism for her financial destruction. My client was young and didn't fully understand the implications. Linda tried desperately, but Robert had anticipated this argument too. Mrs. Harrison was 27 years old when she signed this agreement, a licensed real estate professional with a college degree. She also bragged to friends about outsmarting Mr. Harrison by adding protective clauses to their prenup. Robert produced text message screenshots that Victoria had foolishly sent to her sister Claire, messages where she gloated about adding clauses that would keep Troy in line and ensure she couldn't be screwed over legally. Victoria stared at her own words displayed on legal documents, her face cycling through disbelief, anger, and growing panic. Linda's confident courtroom posture had completely collapsed as she realized her client had not only violated her own prenuptial agreement but had documented her strategic intentions in writing. Mrs. Harrison attempted to claim financial abuse, Robert continued, but bank records show that she spent an average of $3,200 monthly on personal expenses while contributing less than $800 to household costs. Mr. Harrison subsidized her lifestyle for 4 years while she publicly declared her control over their financial decisions. The meeting concluded with Linda requesting time to review the evidence and consider their options, but everyone in that room knew Victoria's case had just evaporated. As we left the building, Victoria was silent for the first time since I'd known her, finally understanding that her need to publicly demonstrate dominance had given me everything I needed to escape our marriage with my financial security intact. We can still fight this, Linda told her quietly, but Victoria was smart enough to recognize the desperation in her attorney's voice and realize that her birthday announcement about controlling our finances had become the final nail in the coffin of her comfortable lifestyle. The formal divorce hearing was scheduled for a cold February morning in Judge Patricia Hartwell's courtroom, an austere space with high ceilings and wooden benches that made every whispered conversation echo ominously. Victoria arrived dressed in her most conservative business suit, apparently coached by Linda to project an image of wounded respectability rather than the controlling spouse her own words had revealed her to be. She'd spent the weeks leading up to this hearing telling anyone who would listen that she was going to destroy Troy financially and make him pay for trying to manipulate the system against innocent women. Her social media posts had become increasingly bitter, with vague references to abusive men who hide behind legal technicalities and fighting for justice in a corrupt system designed to protect manipulative husbands. I sat quietly beside Robert, watching Victoria whisper urgently to Linda while glancing nervously around the courtroom as if expecting some last-minute miracle to save her from the consequences of her own documented behavior. Judge Hartwell was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who'd built her reputation on carefully reviewing evidence rather than being swayed by emotional appeals, exactly the kind of judge Robert had hoped we'd draw for this case. Your Honor, Linda began when called upon, my client was trapped in a psychologically abusive marriage where she was punished for expressing herself naturally in social situations. The prenuptial agreement contains unconscionable clauses designed to terrorize Mrs. Harrison into silence and submission. It was a desperate strategy, trying to reframe Victoria's public humiliation as natural self-expression rather than deliberate cruelty, but Judge Hartwell's expression remained neutral as she listened to arguments she'd clearly heard many times before. The so-called humiliation clause is vague and punitive, Linda continued, and my client's casual comments at a social gathering hardly constitute the kind of deliberate professional sabotage this agreement was designed to prevent. Victoria nodded along eagerly, apparently believing her attorney's spin might actually work despite the overwhelming evidence against her. When Robert stood to present our case, he did so with the methodical precision of someone who'd spent weeks preparing for this exact moment. Your Honor, Mrs. Harrison didn't make casual comments at a social gathering. She deliberately and publicly humiliated her husband in front of his professional colleagues, including his direct supervisor, by declaring that she controls all aspects of their marriage and that he lacks the competence to make adult decisions. Robert presented the witness statements one by one, reading direct quotes from Victoria's Christmas party performance while she sat increasingly rigid in her chair. Mrs. Harrison told Mr. Harrison's supervisor that she wears the pants in their relationship, announced a major financial decision without consulting her husband, and discussed training him to perform household tasks as if he were her employee rather than her spouse. Judge Hartwell reviewed the video evidence, listening to Victoria's own voice declaring her dominance over our marriage while my colleagues shifted uncomfortably in the background. Furthermore, Robert continued, Mrs. Harrison added this clause to their prenuptial agreement specifically to protect herself from similar humiliation, then violated her own contract by engaging in precisely the behavior she'd sought to prevent. This was the moment Victoria's composure began to crack. She'd been maintaining a facade of wounded dignity, but hearing her own strategic additions to our prenup used against her was clearly devastating to whatever remained of her confidence. Your Honor, she interrupted suddenly, half rising from her chair despite Linda's attempts to restrain her, he's making this sound worse than it was. I was just being social at a party. I didn't mean to hurt anyone's feelings. Judge Hartwell looked at Victoria with the kind of stern expression that immediately conveyed she didn't appreciate interruptions. Mrs. Harrison, please remain seated and allow your attorney to represent you. But Victoria was beyond strategic thinking now, her need to control the narrative overriding her lawyer's coaching. I deserve half of our assets, she continued, her voice rising despite Linda's frantic gestures. I supported his career, I managed our finances, I made him look successful. You can't just take everything away because of some ridiculous technicality. The desperation in her voice was palpable, and I could see Judge Hartwell taking notes about Victoria's continued insistence on her right to control our financial decisions even during divorce proceedings. Mrs. Harrison, Judge Hartwell said firmly, I've reviewed your prenuptial agreement, the documented evidence of your violation of its terms, and your husband's financial records showing his subsidization of your lifestyle throughout your marriage. Victoria's face went completely white as she realized the judge was about to deliver her verdict. Based on the clear language of your prenuptial agreement, which you had independent legal counsel to review and which included clauses you personally insisted upon, I find that your public humiliation of your husband in a professional setting constitutes a material breach of your contract. The courtroom was absolutely silent as Judge Hartwell continued. You are entitled to your personal belongings and your premarital assets, which according to these financial records total approximately $15,000 in your individual savings account. All marital assets acquired during your marriage remain with Mr. Harrison as specified in your now void prenuptial agreement. Victoria's reaction was immediate and dramatic. Her face went from white to gray, her breathing became rapid and shallow, and she began swaying in her chair as the reality of losing everything hit her like a physical blow. No, 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 she whispered, then louder, you can't do this to me. I need that money. I need our house fund. I have nowhere to go. Linda tried to support her client physically as Victoria began hyperventilating, gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned white. Your Honor, my client is clearly distressed, Linda said desperately. Perhaps we could request a brief recess. But Victoria was beyond the point where a recess would help. She stood up shakily, then collapsed back into her chair, her expensive suit wrinkled and her carefully applied makeup streaking as she began crying uncontrollably. "He planned this," she gasped between sobs. "He manipulated me into saying those things so he could steal everything. This isn't fair. This isn't justice." The irony of Victoria claiming manipulation while sitting in a courtroom where her own words had condemned her was apparently lost on her, but Judge Hartwell's expression suggested she'd seen this kind of dramatic breakdown before. "Mrs. Harrison, you violated the terms of an agreement you personally helped draft. Your husband didn't manipulate you into public humiliation. You chose to engage in that behavior despite knowing the potential consequences." Victoria literally collapsed then, sliding from her chair to the floor as the full weight of her situation became clear. She'd lost the house fund, the savings account, the comfortable lifestyle, and the financial security she'd spent 4 years taking for granted. Linda knelt beside her client, clearly as stunned by the complete legal defeat as Victoria was by its financial implications, while courtroom security moved closer to ensure Victoria didn't become a disruption to other proceedings. As they helped Victoria to her feet and guided her toward the exit, she turned back to look at me with a mixture of hatred and desperation that would have been frightening if I hadn't been sitting next to the attorney who just secured my freedom from 4 years of psychological and financial abuse disguised as marriage. 6 months after the courtroom collapse that ended my marriage, I was living in a sleek downtown condo with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan, finally enjoying the financial freedom that came from not subsidizing someone else's delusions of grandeur. The place was everything Victoria would have hated: minimalist, practical, focused on comfort rather than impressing people who didn't matter. I'd furnished it with quality pieces that reflected my actual taste rather than whatever designer trend Victoria had been obsessing over that particular month. My life had become remarkably peaceful without the constant drama of someone who treated every social interaction as an opportunity to demonstrate her superiority over her supposedly inadequate husband. That's when I met Emma Walsh at a professional networking event for engineers and architects, a collaboration workshop focused on sustainable building design that attracted exactly the kind of intelligent, driven people I'd forgotten existed during my years with Victoria. Emma was a freelance architect who specialized in residential renovation projects, someone who actually understood the technical challenges of structural engineering rather than just seeing buildings as expensive status symbols. "You're the guy who designed the Morrison Avenue Bridge renovation," she said, approaching me during the coffee break with genuine enthusiasm about my work. "I've been following that project in the trade journals. The way you solved the foundation issues while preserving the historical facade was brilliant." It had been years since someone had shown authentic interest in my professional accomplishments rather than just calculating how much money they represented. Emma was petite with short auburn hair and the kind of focused intelligence that comes from solving complex problems for a living, and when she smiled about my engineering solutions, I felt something I'd almost forgotten: the pleasure of being appreciated for my actual abilities rather than my earning potential. We ended up talking for 2 hours about everything from sustainable materials to Chicago's architectural history, and when she suggested we continue the conversation over dinner, I realized I was genuinely excited about spending time with someone who saw me as an interesting person rather than a financial resource to be managed. "I have to admit," Emma said during our third date, "I was worried you might be one of those engineers who's brilliant with structures but terrible with people. You're actually quite thoughtful and funny when you're not talking about load-bearing calculations." She had no idea how long it had been since someone had described me as thoughtful rather than boring, or funny rather than too serious, or interesting rather than financially useful. Emma appreciated my methodical approach to planning dates, my attention to details that might make her evening more enjoyable, and my ability to actually listen to her ideas rather than just waiting for my turn to talk. Meanwhile, Victoria's life had taken a dramatically different trajectory. Through mutual friends and social media posts she hadn't blocked me from seeing, I learned that she'd moved back in with her parents after being unable to afford rent on her real estate salary alone. Her mother Claire had apparently been furious about the divorce outcome, demanding to know how Victoria had managed to throw away such a good provider through her own stupidity. The woman who'd spent 4 years bragging about her superior financial management skills was now sleeping in her childhood bedroom, asking her parents for gas money, and working extra shifts showing houses to afford the lifestyle she'd taken for granted as my wife. Her Instagram posts had evolved from luxury lifestyle content to bitter inspirational quotes about manipulative men who use legal systems against innocent women, and rising above toxic people who try to destroy your dreams. The comments section was filled with her friends offering vague support, but I noticed that none of them were offering practical help like money or housing, suggesting that Victoria's entitled attitude had worn thin with people beyond just her ex-husband. She's been posting some really weird stuff lately, my brother Mark mentioned during one of our monthly dinners. Lots of angry quotes about justice and revenge. Mom's worried she might try to cause problems for you. But Victoria's attempts at revenge were more pathetic than threatening. She'd apparently been telling anyone who would listen that I'd stolen her money through legal manipulation, conveniently omitting the part where she'd spent 4 years spending my money while publicly humiliating me. Her version of events painted her as a victim of an elaborate scheme rather than someone who'd destroyed her own marriage through documented cruelty and entitlement. The most satisfying piece of information came through Emma, who'd heard through Chicago's professional network that Victoria had been struggling to maintain clients in her real estate career. Apparently, she's been having trouble with professional relationships, Emma mentioned casually over dinner. Something about being too controlling and making unrealistic demands on both clients and colleagues. Word gets around in this city when someone's difficult to work with. It seemed that Victoria's need to control and manipulate people hadn't been limited to our marriage, and without my income to cushion the consequences of her behavior, she was discovering how quickly professional bridges could burn when you treated everyone like they existed to serve your agenda. 3 months into my relationship with Emma, Victoria made her most desperate attempt at interference by showing up at Emma's architectural firm during a busy Friday afternoon, apparently believing she could convince my new girlfriend that I was some kind of manipulative sociopath who destroyed an innocent woman's life. She seemed genuinely shocked that I wasn't interested in hearing her victim narrative, Emma told me that evening, clearly more amused than concerned by Victoria's dramatic appearance. I told her that anyone who would track down their ex-husband's girlfriend at work to badmouth him was probably not the most reliable source of character assessment. Victoria had apparently spent 20 minutes in Emma's office lobby, alternating between tears and anger while describing how I'd stolen everything and ruined her life through legal technicalities, apparently expecting Emma to immediately dump me based on the word of a stranger who'd admitted to being my bitter ex-wife. The security guard finally had to escort her out, Emma continued, but not before she made it clear that she considers you her property that I've somehow stolen. It was actually kind of fascinating from a psychological perspective. Emma's calm, analytical response to Victoria's manipulation attempt was everything I'd hoped for and exactly what Victoria couldn't have anticipated. Someone with actual self-confidence and professional success didn't feel threatened by the desperate tactics of a woman who'd lost everything through her own choices, and Victoria's dramatic performance had only reinforced Emma's understanding of why our marriage had failed so spectacularly. A year after Victoria's courtroom collapse, Emma and I decided to announce our engagement at the Palmer House Hotel, the same elegant venue where Victoria had first publicly humiliated me and unknowingly triggered the legal clause that would destroy her comfortable lifestyle. The private dining room I reserved was identical to the one Victoria had chosen for her disastrous birthday celebration, and I'd invited many of the same guests who'd witnessed both her triumphant house announcement and her complete financial downfall. My parents were there, clearly relieved to see me with someone who treated me as an equal partner rather than a financial resource to be managed, along with my brother Mark and several colleagues who remembered Victoria's Christmas party performance with uncomfortable clarity. Emma's family had flown in from Minneapolis, her parents immediately charming everyone with their genuine warmth and obvious pride in their daughter's architectural achievements. The evening was progressing beautifully, with Emma showing engagement photos and discussing our plans for a small ceremony focused on celebration rather than expensive displays, when the hostess approached our table with a concerned expression. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said quietly, "but there's a woman at the front desk claiming she needs to speak with someone from this party. She seems quite distressed and says it's urgent." I knew immediately who it was, and Emma's slight smile suggested she'd reached the same conclusion. "Let me handle this," I told Emma, but she shook her head with the calm confidence that had attracted me to her in the first place. We'll handle it together. I'm curious to see what she wants now. Victoria was standing in the hotel lobby looking like a shadow of her former self, wearing a dress that had clearly seen better days and clutching a small purse that suggested her financial situation hadn't improved since our divorce. She'd lost weight in an unhealthy way, her hair looked unkempt despite obvious attempts to style it, and her makeup couldn't quite hide the dark circles under her eyes that spoke to months of stress and poor sleep. "Troy," she said when she saw me approaching with Emma, "I need to talk to you. Please, just 5 minutes." Her voice was softer than I'd heard it in years, lacking the commanding tone she'd used throughout our marriage. "I've been working on myself, going to therapy, learning about my behavior patterns. I understand now how wrong I was about everything." The desperation was evident, but there was something else too, a calculated quality that suggested this wasn't entirely the spontaneous emotional appeal she wanted it to appear. "I realize now that I took you for granted," Victoria continued, glancing nervously at Emma before focusing back on me. "I treated our marriage like a business arrangement instead of a partnership, and I'm genuinely sorry for the way I humiliated you publicly. You didn't deserve that kind of treatment from someone who was supposed to love and support you." It was probably the closest thing to a genuine apology I'd ever heard from Victoria, but the timing was suspect and the audience was clearly chosen for maximum emotional impact. "I appreciate the apology," I said calmly, "but I'm not sure what you're hoping to accomplish here. We're divorced. I've moved on completely." I know," Victoria said quickly, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "But we had 3 good years before everything went wrong. We built something together, shared dreams and plans. Doesn't that count for anything?" Emma stepped slightly closer to me, not possessively but supportively, and I could see Victoria calculating the dynamic between us with the same analytical skills she'd once used to manipulate real estate clients. "Victoria," I said gently but firmly, "those weren't 3 good years. Those were 3 years where I gradually lost myself trying to meet your impossible standards while you treated me like an employee rather than a husband. The only difference now is that I can see the situation clearly." Her composure cracked then, the carefully rehearsed emotional appeal giving way to something more raw and desperate. "But look what you've built without me," she said, gesturing toward the dining room where our families were celebrating. "The condo, the successful career, the beautiful girlfriend who obviously adores you. You've become everything I always said you could be." The irony was breathtaking. Victoria was trying to take credit for my success while ignoring the fact that my life had only improved after removing her constant criticism and financial drain from the equation. "I became this person despite our marriage, not because of it," I replied. "Emma appreciates who I actually am, rather than trying to remake me into someone more impressive. That's the difference between a partnership and a management project." Victoria looked at Emma with something that might have been genuine curiosity for the first time. "What does he give you that I couldn't appreciate? I love Troy. I just wanted him to reach his full potential." Emma's response was everything I could have hoped for and exactly what Victoria needed to hear. "Troy doesn't give me things," Emma said calmly. "We build things together. He doesn't need to reach some external potential because he's already exactly the person I want to partner with. Your mistake was thinking love meant controlling someone rather than celebrating who they already are." The statement hit Victoria like a physical blow, and I could see her processing the fundamental difference between manipulation disguised as improvement and genuine acceptance. "I've lost everything," Victoria whispered, her voice breaking completely. "My house fund, my savings, my comfortable life. I'm 32 years old living with my parents and working retail hours just to afford gas money. Meanwhile, you're getting engaged to someone perfect who probably makes her own money and doesn't need you to fund her lifestyle." It was the first time Victoria had acknowledged the financial reality of our marriage, admitting that she'd been dependent on my income while contributing primarily complaints about my inadequacies. "Victoria," I said with genuine sympathy, "I hope you find what you're looking for. But it was never my job to fund your dreams or accept public humiliation as the price of your affection. Emma and I are building something based on mutual respect and shared goals, not financial dependence and emotional manipulation. She stared at us for a long moment, probably calculating whether there was any angle left to exploit, before her shoulders slumped in final defeat. "I really did love you," she said quietly. "I just didn't know how to show it without trying to control everything." "I know you did," I replied honestly. "But love isn't enough when it comes with conditions and public humiliation. I needed someone who could love me without trying to fix me, and you needed someone who enjoyed being managed rather than partnered with." Victoria nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face as she finally understood that her apology tour wasn't going to restore her comfortable lifestyle or undo the consequences of her documented behavior. As hotel security discreetly approached to ensure she wasn't becoming disruptive, Victoria looked at Emma one last time. "Take care of him," she said with surprising sincerity. "He's a better man than I deserved, and I'm glad he found someone who appreciates that." After Victoria left, Emma and I returned to our engagement celebration, where both families had been waiting with varying degrees of curiosity about the interruption. "Everything all right?" my father asked, clearly concerned about potential drama affecting the evening. "Everything's perfect," Emma replied, squeezing my hand. "Just someone from the past finally getting closure." As we raised our champagne glasses to toast our future together, I realized that Victoria's need to publicly control and humiliate me had been the greatest gift she could have given me. Her violation of our prenuptial agreement hadn't just freed me legally, it had taught me the difference between someone who loves you conditionally and someone who celebrates you unconditionally. Emma's genuine laughter as my brother told embarrassing stories about my childhood was everything Victoria's calculated social performances had never been: real, warm, and completely free of ulterior motives.